It's the 1980s, a time when the mullet was considered a valid thing to ask for in a hairdresser's. But more importantly from our perspective, it's when the Amiga 500 was created. Now here we have a badly treated example. It's been stored somewhere that was far from dry, and a bad case of mould has set in. Luckily for you, smell's not something that YouTube can produce for you, as this A500 has a smell, and it's not a good smell. So we're going to see if we can rescue this particularly mouldy example while we talk about how the A500 came to be. Firstly, let's get it open and see if it's worth saving. Ooh, that's a lot of rust. That does not bode well. Okay, let's get the screening off. I mean, it's not like it's a functional part of the machine, and we'll hope the PCB's fared a little bit better. Oh, the PCB doesn't actually look that bad. I mean, a little bit mouldy still, and it still doesn't smell that great, but yeah, it looks okay. While I take this thing apart, let's have a chat about how the Amiga 500 came to be. The A500 was the Amiga's equivalent of a tricky second album. They needed to bring along what customers they had, and yet grow the Amiga's user base significantly. Commodore had always struggled with who the Amiga was actually for. The original model, now known as the 1000, was expensive but very capable. The thing is, it was probably too expensive for the games market, and this meant the ST from Atari was doing much better, as basically it was cheaper. This meant that games were being written for the ST first, and then ported to the Amiga, as the ST was the larger market. So of course most games available for the Amiga were simply Atari ports, and didn't make use of all the Amiga's custom chipset, which kind of was the whole point of the Amiga in the first place, so they didn't really get an advantage from it. I mean, there was the odd standout exception, the likes of Cinemaware for example. They produced a lot of games that really showed off what the Amiga could do, but still these titles were few and far between. Now the story of the Amiga starts with three dentists, like almost no other story before it, or indeed after it. These three dentists had around $9 million they wanted to invest, and were looking for something a bit more exciting than the usual kind of stuff. So they started a computer company. I mean, yeah, why not? I must admit, I was surprised to find out that dentists started Amiga. It's kind of like discovering your local greengrocer has a space program because they want to get the first marrow on Mars. However, things got off to a relatively good start, as they hired Dave Morris, who had a good background in sales, and he in turn recruited Jay Miner, hardware designer for Atari and the man responsible for the custom chips in Atari's 8-bit line. This new company, High Toro, which would be later renamed Amiga Inc., didn't just start off trying to design their computer, they also started making joysticks and cartridges, as not only a source of revenue, but also a good cover for what they were up to. Now we got this A500 apart, let's give the case a good clean. Now we're going to start with a little bit of a bleach spray because, yeah, it doesn't smell so great. And also then we'll give it a good wash off in the sink. Now while I'm doing the retro equivalent of dishwashing, I think we'll turn back to the story of the A500. I'm going to speed up the Amiga's history a little bit and gloss over a few things, so we can get to the moment where we create the A500. After all, it is the subject of the video. Amiga Inc. soon burned through all their initial financing and the money they made on joysticks. Creating computers is expensive, especially if you want to introduce revolutionary graphics and sounds. So, Amiga Inc. approached Jay Miner's previous employer Atari for financing. They agreed to lend $500,000 in exchange for a 1-year exclusive use of the custom chips. But those custom chips must be ready by a certain deadline, and if not, then Amiga would have to pay back all the money that they borrowed or forfeit the company. After this deal was made, things happened. Irving Gould, primary investor in Commodore, fell out with Jack Tramiel, founder and CEO of Commodore, which meant Jack got fired from his own company. Be fair to say that did not sit well with Jack Tramiel, not even in the slightest. But by this point in time, Atari had started losing money hand over fist, to the point where parent company Warner was in danger of being taken down by it. So they very willingly sold Atari to Jack, who stopped it from losing money by basically firing everyone and stopping everything it was doing. It was at this point that Jack then found out about the Amiga deal, which, to be honest, was Jack's kind of a deal. For only $500,000, an entire 16-bit micro was about to fall into their lap, which is an absolute bargain. However, while all this was going on with Atari, Amiga had struck a deal with Commodore. So Commodore advanced Amiga the money to go repay the loan, which really must have annoyed Jack because he just got stitched once again by the company that had fired him. And it also meant that Amiga became part of Commodore and had the money to finally finish their computer. Oh, and don't worry, our intrepid dentists managed to make their money back. Hurrah for dentists. Well, that's the case clean. My kitchen now smells a little bit of bleach, which frankly is an improvement. Now for the keyboard. So basically this thing is made out of small irritating screws. They swear keyboard manufacturers are really manufacturers of small irritating screws who are just looking for an outlet. So here's some more history why I undo a million tiny irritating screws. With Amiga Inc. now being part of Commodore, they got their money to finish the Amiga. They also had MOS on board to manufacture the custom chips. Having wowed people with its technical demos, the Amiga was launched to great fanfare. The launch event involved artist Andy Warhol using the Amiga to paint Debbie Harry from Blondie, so Commodore really pushed the boat out on that one. The Amiga graphically at this point in time was the most capable micro there was, excluding the very high-end graphic systems built for TV and film from the likes of Quantel and SGI, who were no doubt founded by chiropoders who thought a nuclear fusion program was just a bit too much of a risky investment. So the keyboard's finally open, and we can see the membrane inside. It doesn't look too bad, it's not damaged anywhere or corroded, but it is going to need some clean with IPA as, yup, got mold on it. And also the smell's back, damn it. I'll also take this opportunity to wash the plastic part of the keyboard as well in the sink. And while I get cleaning, let's continue our story. The Amiga now actually exists. But with sales not doing so great and heading in the wrong direction compared to the ST, the future of the Amiga is not necessarily looking so great. Enter two Commodore engineers, George Robbins and Bob Welland, both of whom had been working on Commodore's own 16-bit machine, the Commodore 900, which had now been cancelled because, well, they owned the Amiga. They figured they would start work on a cost-reduced version of the Amiga that could compete in the home gaming market. You would think management would have come up with this plan, but no. They were probably off setting fire to the clown cars that they were driving around in or some other stupid endeavour, as Commodore was never the best managed company, but right after Jack left, it was pure dumpster fire. But for once, management did at least see it the engineer's way and chose not to get in the way. The primary reason the Amiga was so costly to produce was based around the custom chip it used to arbitrate the bus and memory, known as Agnes. The Agnes chip had a lot of buffers around it, but was not fast enough to control those buffer chips itself, so the logic for this was implemented in a bunch of PAL chips, with PAL standing for Programmable Array Logic. It was a kind of reprogrammable chip, kind of like an FPGA or a CPLD from today. These PAL chips really put up the cost of the Amiga. Firstly because the components themselves were not that cheap and they used quite a lot of them, but also the sheer programming time of each individual chip also contributed to the cost. Bob Welland's great idea was to take all this PAL logic and shove it into the Agnes chip, creating Fat Agnes. It would in fact be the largest chip Commodore could make at the time, in a new 84-pin package. They would also increase the amount of chip RAM this chip was allowed to use up to 1 whole meg to support more screen modes. It'd be fair to say that the original Amiga team in Las Casas had some doubts as to would all this work in one package. They also thought the update to the hardware should have been more ambitious. However, years later, a few members of that team would admit that it was a step in the right direction. The idea of a cost-reduced machine was what the Amiga really needed. While the A500 team were fairly sure that their Fat Agnes plan would work, based on the timing calculations they did have an alternate design with the fat part of the Fat Agnes in an entirely different chip. Robbins also had the idea to remove the TV modulator stuff from the main board and put that into an external unit, the A520. He also integrated the keyboard into the main system and removed the power supply unit to an external box. All these changes did the trick. They managed to reduce the cost of the Amiga, or now the Amiga 500, to a price where it was competitive in the games market, and in particular it was competitive with Atari's ST. It's now time to recap our A500. Now you might be thinking, he's not tested it yet, and you'd be right. But if I pick up faults now, I'll be left wondering, is it just that it needs recapping? So, may as well just recap it. I bought a recap kit off RetroBytes. Other recap kits do exist from other people, but I, like the guy, and he sponsored my friend Retro Princess's channel, so RetroBytes it is. Now, why had he soldered these old caps and removed them? It's story time once more, or I fear this video might get a little bit dull. The A500 is finished and finally on general sale, and initially it does fairly well. However, things are about to get much better, as some developers, attracted by what the Amiga's custom chips can do, start targeting the Amiga first, and produce games that take advantage of those chips. The Atari ports of these games don't look so good. Firstly, there's the colour difference. The Amiga has 32 colours in its normal screen mode, the ST's using 16. In terms of game sound and music, most computer games sound a heck of a lot better on the Amiga than they do on the ST, due to the Amiga's really good sound chip. Also, the hardware scrolling built into the Amiga really starts to make a difference with platformers, as you can have smooth scrolling both left and right and up and down, whereas with the ST it doesn't really have hardware scrolling, so you can kind of with the CPU do smooth scrolling up and down, but not left and right. Now this in turn helps sell more Amigas, which encourages more developers to develop for the Amiga first. That helps sell more Amigas. You can see a virtuous circle developing here, can't you? The next major leap forwards for the Amiga was when David Pleasance, head of marketing for Commodore Europe, comes up with the idea of a bundle, something that everyone does now. You can buy the computer with a number of games bundled in. Well, the first Christmas he tried this with the Batman pack, over 100,000 machines were sold in the UK. The following Christmas, more or less every computer then does at it. But by then, the Amiga's taken the lead, and, well, the ST can't ever really close the ground that it lost. When it comes to home computer sales in Europe, the Amiga 500 basically won the market. It sold more machines than any other computer during this period into this particular market, with Atari's ST coming in second position. So, all the old caps have been removed, time to solder in some new ones. I'll speed this footage up a bit. After all, we don't have all day. Once that's all done, I'll put it back together. Take a power supply I know is good, and power it up. Are you ready? No smoke, that's a good sign. And it boots. Phew. I was about to say job done, but then after playing a few games on it, we had some crashing, and then some problems booting up when I switched it off and on. However, when it won't boot, if I poke the 68000 CPU or the Kickstart ROM, it does boot. So probably time to resolder the pins on the CPU and Kickstart socket, as some of those joints, yeah, they don't look their best. Once done, a quick shot of contact cleaner on both the CPU and Kickstart sockets, and we may as well redo the Fatagnes socket while we're here too. Give that a quick blast. I also noticed that while resoldering this, the Fatagnes socket has been resoldered before at some point before I got it. Possibly a repair back in the day? I'll put that back together, and it now boots fine every single time. Right, I'm off to the living room to play some games on the big TV, I think. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for watching. If you have memories of the Amiga 500, or you're perhaps an ST user, then please share some of those memories in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, why not click like, and share it with others you think might enjoy it. I mean, probably best not to share it with people you don't think will like it. I mean, that's a good way to lose friends. If you really enjoyed it, also why not subscribe, as it means a lot to small channels like this one and encourages us to keep making more videos.